United Artists approached me and asked me if I'd make a film for them. And I thought they had a script or a book or something. And I said, what have you got? And they said, well, we want to make a movie with the Beatles. I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So they introduced me to Brian, and I guess he thought I was okay. And next thing I do, I had to meet the Beatles. Well, the first meeting I had with him, Brian Epstein was supposed to bring them to my office in London, and he showed up on time, but the Beatles, they didn't come. Brian came, and he apologized. He said, I'm afraid we'll have to do it some other time, but they're over at EMI Studios at Abbey Road in on a session that another group that Brian had managed, so I have to go over there to meet them. So I said, well, can I go with you? And he said, certainly. So we jumped in a taxi, and he said, well, let's stop by their apartment here in London first. And sure enough, they all came down looking for a taxi. So they jumped into our taxi, and you know, London taxis are only for 4, so there's 6 of us in there. And I thought I was in the middle of a Marx Brothers movie. Every time the taxi stopped, they'd grab all the newspapers that had Beatle headlines, which they did. And I asked the Beatles, when could we start filming? And John opened up his little diary, and he said, well, we're going to the Bahamas for a holiday. And then in February, he said, we're going to go to your country. We're going to go to New York and do something called the Ed Sullivan Show. And I said, well, that'll be fine. While you're in the Bahamas, write at least 6 new songs for our picture. And John said, well, what's the film about? And I said, I don't know. We haven't got a writer yet. And he said, well, what kind of songs do we write? And I said, Beatles songs. I don't know, 2 up-tempo, 2 ballads. I don't know, write 6 new Beatles songs. And John said, you have a director in mind? I said, yes, another American over here named Richard Lester. And he said, what has he done? And I said, well, he's done some very good television stuff with the Goons. Now, the Goons were an English comedy group that predated the Monty Python group, and Dick had directed their television, and I knew that the Beatles were Goon fans. So when I said Dick Lester, they said, well, get him. And that's how it all started.
I knew Dick through his work with Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers and the Goons, which, of course, because I made all their records. And Dick Lester was an unconventional type of director. He'd grown up in the world of advertising films and shortcuts and all sorts of things. And that kind of led to A Hard Day's Night. So I was quite expecting an unusual kind of movie. And I was glad he was on board, because I certainly didn't want another summer holiday.
I went to Dick and I said, okay, I want you to make the Beatles movie. And he was very intrigued. He says, what do you think it should be? I said, I don't care. It's your responsibility to decide what kind of movie it is, how to make the boys work. Tell me who you want to hire to write this script. Come back with it, and whatever you do, I'm sure we're going to want to go. So the entire creative input as to what this movie should be and how to maximize the talents of this extraordinary group of young men came from Dick Lester, Alan Owen, and Walter Shenson.